bank account closed because he doesn't hold political views that the bank agree with. This is extraordinary stuff. I'm seeing many people making the case that a private company can do what it likes. It's up to them who they allow in as customers, and they have the right to kick you out for whatever reason. If they don't like the cut of your jib, then so be it. But this doesn't really work with banks. Remember 2008, the financial crash. They were too big to fail. This is not just any other business, but the backbone of our economy. Banks are a different case altogether. And I think we understand that. It was true, but it does somewhat inconveniently bring us to the next point. Coutts Bank is part of the RBS Group and NatWest, etc. 40% owned by the taxpayer. 40%. One of the largest chunks of this very business is owned by you and I. Our business. We literally own it. Coutts have a ton of questions to answer on this. Who made the rules? Was it at a board level? Was it the customer care department? Was it the work experience kid? The janitor, maybe? Who came to this decision that Mr. Farage was unfit for the kind of values and beliefs they apparently have? Will Coutts now tell us and publish whatever that political test is that has to be passed? Surely this is the only way that a customer can then judge if they are suited to their moral outfit. And what other criteria is there? What if you've got, I don't know, a criminal record, for example? Would that disqualify you from opening an account? Many rich people have been on the inside. I'm sure some of them have got an account over there at Coutts. Plus, banks have statutory regulated duties as well. They can't discriminate on protected characteristics like race and gender, but apparently they can on political ones. And I think we have the right to know what they are. Who made the rules? Board level? Customer care department? Who the heck was it? Initially, they told us he didn't fit the criteria. Remember that? That was initially what we heard. He didn't have enough money, they said. And this was glibly reported by the BBC without any kind of challenge or investigation. They should have smelt a rat from the off. Any journalist would have done. It was actually my first thought was that this isn't about his bank balance. This is about who he is. You might have thought that the BBC newsroom would have bothered to look at that angle of this story as well. 0344 499 1000. Is freedom of speech under attack here? We'll get some comments from you on this in a few moments' time. Let's get a view from George Pascoe-Watson, former political editor at The Sun, chairman of Portland Communications, on this story and a few others as well. George, afternoon to you.
Ian, great to see you.
Always good to have you on with us. I mean, this is an extraordinary story, the Nigel Farage. One of those stories that I think if you sort of suggested it a year ago, people would have said that would never happen. But it is happening. It's very real. It's now no longer denied. He didn't fit the criteria. They didn't like his views.
Yeah, I think there's a real reputation issue here. Firstly, for Coutts Bank. I mean, Coutts Bank is known for everything but being out and about. It's a discreet bank, perhaps one of the most discreet banks. Yeah. So the idea that we're even talking about them publicly will be really bad for them in terms of the sort of brand. So they like to be quiet. They're discreet, behind the scenes, below the radar. Somewhere, someone has made a decision here which seems to be really running in the face of freedom of speech. It is true, of course, that private firms can pick and choose how they do their business. That's absolutely right. But in terms of reputation, there are questions here to answer. And I think also that the way that they originally handled the inquiry from the BBC leaves a lot to be desired. There's no question that open and transparency is the way to go forward even when there's a controversial situation. I also think from a Farage point of view, there aren't going to be that many people weeping into their pints of beer. Nigel Farage, during a cost of living crisis, complaining that he can't have a bank account at Coutts, which of course has a very high threshold for wealth.
This is true. But the wider question, I guess, George, on this, has to be, well, what is the... It would be nice to now know what the criteria is, because they've fessed up that there is clearly a system in place, whereas if they don't like your political views, then they can refuse or banish your custom. Now, if that is the case, I'm pretty sure it would take me about an hour going through their customer database to find people who either align themselves with Nigel Farage or have other views that some people might find nefarious or objectionable.
Well, I mean, it all boils down to one thing. How can we live in a world where your political views or your thoughts about society forbid you from having a bank account or even other membership of some sort of organization. In that world, that's a very, very unpleasant world indeed. There's also a secrecy to it. We can't know what the membership rules are, and that's clearly a backward step and something we shouldn't encourage. It is clear that Andrew Griffith, the banking minister, is now looking into this situation because he realizes it's a very important situation. There is a claim of being debanked. I think that's not really the case because he has been offered a bank account at NatWest. So that's really not the issue. The issue is whether or not we should be in a world where, because somebody disagrees with your perfectly legitimately held point of view, that you can't get a bank account. It seems a very sort of retrograde step and something slightly sinister.
It's extraordinary. Not the last we will hear of that. Let's look at Just Stop Oil here, George. The extraordinary scenes this morning. I think we all predicted at some point that this style of protesting, if you like, at some point is going to end in tears and possibly with some violence, and we've seen exactly that today. It was a pretty ugly scene. I know we're going to show the images of this, and it is disturbing because it's somebody clearly getting punched twice and also kicked as well. What looks to be a kick to the head. This is brutal. Nobody would endorse this. But simultaneously, George, I don't think it comes as much of a surprise to most of us.
Well, there's a real question, actually, as to whether or not we in the media should be even showing this kind of footage, because it encourages the campaigners. Campaigners have a perfectly legitimate right to make their point in public, and that's the law of this land, fair enough. But I think we've discussed this in the past. There's always a danger that tempers are going to run out of control and not being able to be policed. Now, we've seen at sporting events these sorts of campaigners making that point, but they've been extremely professionally handled and dealt with very, very quickly. But here in public streets, where we know the police are in attendance, these sorts of tempers are boiling out of control, and it's a very, very dangerous situation. Nobody can possibly endorse the behavior of anybody who attacks anybody physically. And I don't care where you are on this argument, that's just a bottom line.
Absolutely. And I also agree with you. I'm slightly uncomfortable seeing this as well. But I guess there's a couple of points or things that it does throw up, George, and one is the absence of the police. And everything we've seen recently, whether it's motorcyclists driving through banners or cars really nudging right up to the shoulder blades of those sitting in the roads, what has been remarkable in all of that footage we've seen of late is there appears to be no police officers around.
Yeah, which is, I agree with you, highly unusual. We've seen here in the capital in London lots of police presence, and in fact there's a lot of Just Stop Oil activity here today and in previous days, and there have been police officers present. And I think where this has happened and there hasn't been, we see what happens when it gets out of control. There is no excuse for this behaviour, but at the same time there is a requirement to make sure that the public can go safely about their normal run of play in the course of their day, and people should be protected from what could easily, as we see, fly out of control here. And you see it in other countries. The police are very quick to move the protesters. And also you see extreme acts of violence being carried out. And I think it's a very, very dangerous situation. And for me, the real problem is every time an incident like this happens, it heightens awareness of the campaigners, which is what they want in the end. I see their point, but it's a very dangerous thing to happen. And I think the police have to get a grip of it. Yeah,
it's curious because the average copper on the beat doesn't want to ignore violence or any other situation, and quite often they're at the mercy of the senior command who tell them what to do, what not to do. There's a huge debate about what constitutes the right to protest and how much disruption you're allowed to cause. So it's still a bit of a grey area, I sense, in that one. But this particular incident today does take a slightly more sinister turn in what's been going on. Another sinister story as well. I think we're all a bit disturbed by 28,000 convicted of COVID rule breaches, particularly since, we have seen that parts of the establishment also didn't cover themselves in glory during COVID. What is interesting about this story is these court cases are still ongoing, George. There's like 100 a month where magistrates are still saying, we caught you hugging your mum, or we saw you walking in the park, or you were huddled with 6 of you when there should have been 5 of you. It does seem now a little bit insane.
Well, of course, everybody's got an A-level in hindsight, Ian, and if we look back, we think that...
I've got a PhD, George. I don't know about
Well, indeed you do. In fact, one of the most qualified people on earth.
Absolutely.
But the truth of the matter is the law was the law, and the police's job is to prosecute under the orders of of Parliament, and that's the job that they had to do.
Yeah.
It is also the job of the magistrates' courts to proceed with the cases when they've been brought by the CPS. It's their job, and so you'd have to basically bring in an act of Parliament and have an amnesty on all future prosecutions, and then people who had been prosecuted already would, of course, rightly be able to say, we want compensation.
Indeed, and I want my £10,000 fine back as well. So that would inevitably be the direction of travel. Listen, George, always great to get your take on these things. George Pascoe-Watson, former political editor over there at The Sun, one of the most respected voices out there.